Everyone. Welcome to another Innovation Forum webinar. It's a little bit different. I wonder what the audience is going to be. We've been hosting webinars as Innovation Forum for many years, so we have a good idea of our network, but this is a new one in the series. I'm Tanya Richard, I'm COO, and I also head up the Stakeholder Engagement and Communication arm at Innovation Forum, and I'll be moderating the conversation today. So we've created this community and sort of series off of the back of a call from our network to put together this series/network. Really, it seemed like there was a lot of, more rising scrutiny, a call for more transparency, regulation, growing expectation from consumers, from clients. So we wanted to bring together this group and start sort of opening that conversation amongst us as professionals in this space. And we've already seen some really good feedback on it. It's been great to see how a lot of people have been saying, we've been looking for this sort of community for a while. So it's been great to see the interest already. So we are starting the series. What that will look like, we'll see over the next year or so, but we're starting the series with 2 webinars. So this one is on where we bring 4 experts who are working in B2B companies. So we have Zoe from OFI, Hannah from CCEP's Coca-Cola European Partners, Enda from Carbery Group, Zara from Givaudan, joining us for this webinar. And then we have one that's with companies in the more B2C space. That will be in January, where we have Primark, Kantar, and then more speakers to be announced for that one. My colleague might have a link to join that, to register for that webinar. So if you want to join the webinar in January as well, feel free to sign up via the link. And also, in part of creating that community, we have a form just to fill out in case there's specific topics that you would like to see covered in the next conversation. So feel free to put in your information, and we've already received sort of almost 100 responses there. So I also have that open in case there's any interesting points that we should raise from the feedback that you've given as listeners. So in true Innovation Forum spirit, we're keeping some of it the same as our usual webinars, but we try to be really dynamic and engaging in all of these conversations. So as much as I'll be sort of leading the conversation with these 4 fantastic speakers, the idea is to make this feel dynamic and answer the questions that are most important to you as the listeners. So please feel free to drop in any questions that you have in the chat. I'll get to them as and when. So if you already have like 12 burning questions right now, feel free to put them in already, and then I'll get to them throughout the next hour. And otherwise, I'll have plenty of questions to keep us going. But really, I want to make sure that this works for everyone listening. So I think we're in a good place. Let's get started. Hannah, if I can turn to you first, if you can introduce yourself, your role at CCEP and CCEP as a whole, and then just to kind of set the scene basically for everyone. If you could also say, where does sustainability communications fit within your organization, and how does that affect your role? That'd be great. Thanks, Hannah.
Thank you, and thank you very much for having me this afternoon. So I'm Hannah Rizo, so I head up Sustainability Communications at CCEP, which is an acronym for Coca-Cola Europacific Partners. So we are one of the world's largest bottlers of Coca-Cola and other products. We operate in 31 markets across most of Western Europe, Australia, the Pacific, and parts of Southeast Asia. And we have over 40,000 employees across all of those markets. I've been at CCEP for 8 years now, 6 of those in this sustainability comms specific role. But as a background, I've worked in comms for 20 years, always in corporate communications, but in my former life in agency, working on financial services and food and drink clients. In terms of my role at CCEP and where it sits, I sit in our PACS function, PACS, and that covers public affairs, communications and sustainability. And I sit in an above market role, so in our sort of central corporate function, which sits above our all of the markets where we operate, that we call our business units. So I think the second part of your question there, Tanya, was kind of how that works in practice in terms of where my role sits. And what I'd say is being able to kind of sit shoulder to shoulder with sustainability and indeed with public affairs, I see as something I'm very lucky and sort of fortunate to do in the way that we're set up. it means we're very aligned with sustainability colleagues, and consistency is almost sort of built in to the work that we're doing. And I guess if you think of that in the sort of the day-to-day of comms, that means consistency across any type of comms, whether that is a social media post or something that we would write about in our annual report. I think for me, the huge advantages to this are that it builds knowledge on both sides. We all learn a lot from each other, and it also builds an understanding, which I think, the more that we work together means that we understand more and more where and how we can support and add value to each other. And also that we collaborate kind of right from the start. We're developing and consulting with the sustainability team. We're not just sort of executing comms work kind of further down the line. So we really understand the projects and understand where we can add that value through the comms lens. Practically, it also means we can be quicker and more efficient too. That doesn't always happen, and I'm sure that's something that would resonate with lots of people on the call, but I think it does set us up a bit more for that type of success. We need to really inform and engage people on sustainability, especially in a business with over 40,000 employees and multiple stakeholder groups. So that means everything from sort of, transparency and protecting the way that we communicate about sustainability, but also, doing really strong storytelling about all the work that's taking place. And I think by having us working so closely together opens up more opportunity and puts us in a better position to do that.
Great. Thank you, Hannah. I mean, in terms of, building that it builds the knowledge and understanding between those two teams, do you have any examples of where, that has worked really well, where you've seen, because we work together in this, in collaboration, X, Y, and Z has happened. Do you have any example of where that has worked well?
I mean, there's probably a kind of spectrum of examples. And I think going back to what I was talking about, if you think of everything from kind of our social media right through to our annual report, that's probably quite a good illustrative way of sort of bringing it to life. I think, a lot of our sort of sustainability experts now really understand social media really well, which is great. It isn't kind of seen as this dark arts that comms goes away and does. They really engage with it. I hope they'd agree that they've learned a lot about it, and that, I think, builds a lot of confidence and trust. We can go to them with an idea that may feel a bit off the wall or a bit different to something that they've typically done, but they trust us, they trust the process, which is great. But then equally, on the other end of the spectrum, I think it means that when we're working on, bigger, dare I say, more sort of serious pieces of work, like our sort of reporting and disclosure, like our annual report, it means that we obviously have the experts there in the reporting and disclosure team, but they also know that they have expertise in my team, whether that's copywriting or looking at how we can optimize content online, to sort of, as I say, really optimize those processes. I mean, those are just sort of two specific examples, but I think they're hopefully very relevant to the comms audience.
Perfect. Thank you. And there's a lot that we'll keep coming to. But so if anyone has any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. But I think those points on reporting, I think the data point will be interesting. And in the poll that we asked at the start on challenges, data, credibility and data was a big point there. So a lot to come back to. But Zoe, if I can turn to you next. Also, just to note, we do have 4 sort of ag food related organizations here. It's just how it happened, but overall, like we work across different industries, so just something to note that we'll be hearing similar. But I think in terms of communication and sustainability, that kind of a lot of this can be applicable in a lot of different areas. So turning to you, if you could introduce yourself and your role at OFI, and similar to Hannah, give us a little bit of an idea of what OFI looks like internally, so that we can start piecing this panel together. And then if you could explain also, where does sustainability communications lie within OFI, that'd be great. Thanks, Zoe.
Thanks, Tanya. So for those of you that haven't heard of OFI, it stands for Olam Food Ingredients. And we are a global food ingredients company. So if you enjoy coffee, cocoa, nuts, and spices, then you've very likely tasted our work. We source from a network of 2.8 million farmers across around 50 countries. We're also growers ourselves. We have almond, coffee, and pepper estates, and we deliver to food and beverage brands and manufacturers globally. Similar to how Hannah explained, sustainability communications at OFI is embedded within the corporate communications function, and we have a bit of a unique triple reporting line to the Chief Human Resources Officer, the Company Secretary, and the Chief Sustainability Officer. And this structure ensures that sustainability communications are fully integrated across key areas of the business, HR, sustainability, and governance. So we're a fulcrum of sorts that aligns messaging and initiatives throughout the organization. My role when I joined OFI, then Olam Group, about 7 years ago, I think it is now, there were just two of us, and I was a group PR manager. 7 years later, I'm now in a relatively new, dedicated sustainability comms function. There are three of us within our global corporate communications team. So the remit's evolved quite a lot. Today, my role focuses on sharing our sustainability journey in a way that builds trust with our partners, strengthens our brand, and shows how we're making a positive impact that can actually help grow our business as well. So specific examples being creating thought leadership flywheels, equipping our subject matter experts as spokespeople at events, media interviews, etc., building employee advocacy and stakeholder engagement. Another element, key part, is trying to bring to life how our corporate purpose is lived, our purpose is to be the change for good food and a healthy future. And in non-corporate spiel, that's the job for comms, showing how that allows us to offer traceability in sourcing, how it can safeguard human rights and support compliance from farm to factory all the way through to the shop shelves, with proof points to really make it meaningful for every stakeholder. So we would say that it's evident in the 180,000 households, for example, that receive nutrition or health support from us, and through our other sustainability efforts too. Our purpose also connects to OFI's overarching communications strategy, which is Choices for Change. This was a milestone moment for sustainability communications last year when we launched it. It's our first overarching strategy that sets 2030 targets for our business. I'll stop there.
Perfect. Thank you, Zoe. A great chance to say that we launched it together. It was maybe a lot of people listening right now watched at the time, but getting that out was, yeah, really great to see how OFI was looking to re-show what your sustainability strategy was and what does that mean to the sector really. You mentioned the relatively sort of new team structure and the development. Could you share a little bit more on how has that evolved within OFI? What were the main goals of each of the teams and how has that changed over the years?
Sure. So the establishment of our small but central team that's dedicated to sustainability, it's shifted from previously limited responsibilities that were tied to specific origins or product platforms. So this development now is supporting a lot more cross-team alignment. It promotes consistent messaging across all regions and functions. It's helping streamline stakeholder engagement and also helps reporting and communications to reflect the organization's overall strategic priorities and commitments. One element of our remit that is definitely got stronger and still getting stronger is in relation to the increased ESG scrutiny that's coming everyone's way. So the comms team plays a really critical role in introducing and embedding processes like verification, so we can make sure that our sustainability claims and data stands up to scrutiny. And we, being plugged into the leadership functions, particularly the sustainability team, means that we really do leverage the CSO's leadership for advocacy as well. Another important development has been we're working towards establishing a sustainability communications centre of excellence. And this means that we are creating useful toolkits, messaging guides, easy to access resources that everyone from marketing to sales to our regional teams can use to speak the same language about the impact that we're having. And alongside that, within the Centre of Excellence, we're also looking at developing a playbook on the big sustainability issues so that we are all aligned in how we talk about things like deforestation or traceability. And ultimately, the idea is that we can make it as easy as possible for all of our employees to get engaged, feel confident, and become passionate advocates for OFI's sustainability journey, both within the company and beyond.
Great. With this being our sort of first webinar, there's a lot that we're going to try and cover over the next hour, but like follow-up conversations, I think we'll be looking even more into reporting. I think, like you said, that internal alignment. We'll go into it a little bit more today, but just to note, I think we'll be doing much more on that as well. But Sarah, maybe from your side, if you could introduce yourself and your role at Gavot and also explain a little bit on where sustainability comms lies within the organization, that'd be great.
Absolutely. So, hi everyone, and thank you again for having me today. So, I'm Sarah Neem, and I lead sustainability communications globally for Givaudan. So, we are a global leader in fragrance and beauty and taste and well-being products. You may well never have heard of Givaudan, but I think somebody told me a stat the other day: around 70% of what you taste and smell in your day has an ingredient that we've made. So we've got a global footprint as a company. There are around 17,000 of us across the world, and sustainability is something that's really part of the organization's DNA, fully embedded into the business strategy. So we have a big opportunity with sustainability communications. My role sits within the corporate communications team, but I also have a dotted line to the sustainability team, and I'm part of Givaudan's global sustainability leadership team. So for me, I think that's an ideal setup because it means that I can build really strong relationships with both of those teams and act as that person who's helping to connect the dots between the work of the sustainability team and the wider organisation. But it means also, I think, as we've sort of talked about already, that I'm able to be fully immersed in the work of the sustainability team day to day, but also at a strategic level. So an example of that would be that as a member of our sustainability leadership team, I was involved directly in the development of the 2030 functional sustainability strategy. And equally, as a member of the corporate communications team, I've been able to look at how we embed sustainability into our overall 2030 communications strategy, which pulls together comms across all of the different functions and business divisions. And then I think, again, a little bit like what we've talked about already, I also work closely alongside our reporting team. So they are also part of corporate communications, but also have very close links into the sustainability team. So for me, I think it's a really good way to be able to bring all of those different elements together and to make sure that sustainability is fully integrated into the company story, and that we can really maximize that communications opportunity.
Thank you, Sarah. Yeah, I mean, could you give us a little bit more of examples of, with such a large global workforce, how does that internal engagement look like? I'm sure there's a lot of people in the room that are like, I'm having to deal with X, Y, and Z. How do you do it? So yeah, if you could give us a little bit on how are you translating your ambitions, sustainability ambitions through those different teams, that'd be great.
Yeah. Absolutely, it's a great question. Overall, I would say that internal comms is the most vital piece of the jigsaw because that engagement really starts from the inside out. And I think for any large company, and I think actually for any company in general, your workforce is your biggest group of potential advocates, but conversely, it could be your biggest group of detractors if you get things wrong. So it's a really critical audience to start with. For me, there are three key elements around that internal engagement. So there's segmentation, storytelling, and narratives. So segmentation for me, and especially when we think about big audiences at this scale, it's super important to segment and prioritize. So we can't be all things to all people. We have to really focus those efforts. And it means being really clear about what the different audiences want and need from communications. So, for example, I know that for some colleagues, they just want to understand what we're shooting for at a high level, the ambitions that we're working towards, what that means to them, but again, at a high level. Then you've got audiences who are really pivotal to the delivery of the strategy that we're setting out to implement here. And they may sit in a number of teams across all sorts of different parts of the organisation, and they may have completely varying understandings and engagement with sustainability. So for them, we have to build very clear messaging on the expectation, but also the opportunity. So a really good example of that is when we launched the 2030 sustainability strategy. I worked really closely with the subject matter experts within the sustainability team and created a cascade toolkit that was designed to equip members of the wider team who would be having conversations with all of these audiences with the right messaging and the very distinct asks to reach those audiences that we were setting out to engage. And then we've got also, I think, the very engaged colleagues who don't necessarily need to deliver something specific against our strategy, but who we know want to be involved. And so we've got a very active network of these colleagues known as green teams, and they're driving site level action all over the world. So for them, it's about, recognizing and celebrating that impact and shining a light on what they're doing so that we can inspire others. And then the storytelling piece. So again, for me, it's really important that we bring these topics to life in a way that's relatable and relevant. And again, if we think about, a huge global audience of people doing very, very different roles across the world, you've got people who are working on sites in factories, you've got people who are working in offices, you've got people who have, all sorts of different worlds and contexts. So we have to find ways to illustrate our story and our progress through the lens of the people who are contributing to that at an individual level. So it really resonates with them. And I saw relevance popped up in that Slido poll. So I think it's something that's really important. And it's why we try and use real colleagues in our comms as much as possible to really draw on that authenticity. And then the third point is the narrative point. And again, I think we've touched on this already. But I think when you're thinking about an audience that's so fragmented and so vast, you've got to make sure that you have in place a clear narrative structure around those topics so that whoever is communicating on them and wherever they sit, there's a common language and a common understanding of the topics.
Great. Thank you, Sarah. 3 points. We love it. Perfect. And last but certainly not least, obviously a different sort of job title. Most people in the room are sort of like head of communications, sustainability communications, but you're head of sustainability at Carbery Group. So if you could introduce yourself, your role, and then coming from this different background, how does that look like within Carbery? What lessons do you have on like communicating this progress internally? Over to you.
Sure. Thanks, Tanya. Thanks for having us. So yeah, I guess my background's a bit different. So I would have done environmental science, and I did a master's in sustainability many moons ago. I've kind of worked in the space 20 odd years. 10 of the last have been with Carbery Group. So maybe just a brief explainer on Carbery. So Carbery is a cooperative. It's owned by dairy farmers down here in the very southern tip of Ireland. So we're actually owned by 4 smaller cooperatives. There's about 1,200 dairy farmers supply milk through those co-ops that comes into our headquarters here, where we make a lot of cheese. It's actually the biggest cheddar making facility in Europe, we believe. So Dubliner cheese is one of our flagship products. We also make whey protein ingredients, whey protein concentrates here. And then we've got a separate business which has got a global footprint that goes under the Synergy banner. And that's like a mini Givaudan, actually. It's very much in that flavors, essence, and taste space. So yeah, they've got locations in the US, Brazil, Italy, Indonesia, Malaysia, and UK as well. So that's quite a distinct business, but it all goes under the Carbery banner. And I suppose as part of my role, I oversee sustainability across the whole group. So yeah, very much coming at it, I guess, from the sustainability professional perspective. But I would say, Tanya, as well, that comms is a huge part of it, even of my own role, but certainly our own team as well, because you're communicating to your internal audience, but also externally. And I suppose we would work closely with our communications team on that. So to your second question, I guess on kind of lessons and stuff that we've learned. I think I would have shared this with you last week. Something definitely I'd be a big proponent of is being transparent and not being afraid of making mistakes, even to a wider audience, because certainly it would be our experience that garners trust. Um, and if I have a minute, I might just give an example of a project, I suppose, that I suppose we've seen this in action. So we've a project called Farm Zero C, which is quite a unique project. We're trying to develop a climate neutral dairy farm at scale here in one of our farms. And again, it's a real example of collaboration. So we're at this 5+ years at this stage, and we're collaborating with a whole host of universities and technological partners. We've made really good progress, and we were making really, really good progress up to last year in terms of the decarbonization aspect of the project. It's much bigger than carbon. We're also working on biodiversity, air quality, water quality, the whole system really. But one of the key goals is around decarbonization. And we had made really steady progress up to last year on that. So we'd reduced the footprint by 27% up to 24. And then we get a really bad year weather-wise. So this is a real life biological system. Because of the bad weather, basically had to feed the cows more concentrate and more inputs. And that drove the footprint upwards. So again, I suppose you're then kind of faced with this dilemma. We've made so much good progress. We've now got this issue. We've had a setback. How is that going to look? And I suppose, some people are saying, oh, we got to camouflage that. We can't really. And I suppose our view was, no, we got to be, truthful and transparent. And certainly was our experience when you actually talk to customers and talk to people, they totally understand that. They totally get it. That's realistic. That's life. So that's certainly something we found. I would say, Tanya, being transparent and being honest. It does garner trust, I would say. So yeah, that would be one example.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for sharing that example. Was there, when you were, being honest about that spike, internally or, with consumers or with clients, did anyone ever say, internally, like, don't share that, that looks bad? How did you respond to that?
So yeah, certainly there was a sense of we got to be very, very careful how this is communicated. And yeah, there would have been voices saying, "Oh, you just can't go out there with that because," and of course, let's not forget as well, Tanya. There's also a commercial angle to this, and we are reliant for that project on some external funding partners. And of course, it's a feel. How is this going to look? It's going to be a setback. So yeah, absolutely, there was people saying you just can't go out there with this. But look, we from the get-go, I guess that's the way we've operated in that project. It's been very much what you see is what you get. And in the true spirit of collaboration, I guess we got there. And but yeah, absolutely there was voices saying, no, you can't go there with that. Yeah. And we did face that. I guess that those kind of internal hurdles, but we got over that.
Yeah. Okay, great. I want to spend the next little bit on looking a little bit more on the internal discussions, and there are already questions coming through. So thanks for everyone who's asked, and then going into a little bit of the external part. Just before that, I wonder if maybe from Enda and Zoe, is there anything on like communicating specifically to farmers as an important stakeholder in this as well that could be interesting to share? And does that differ, or do you have initial or top level insights to share before we go into those other parts? Either. Enda, you're unmuted, so I might turn to you
Yeah,
first.
yeah, I might kick it off. So again, it's the same philosophy, Tanya. Again, it's being honest and upfront with them, because I can tell you of all the cohorts of people, the people that will smell BS quickest are farmers, and they don't tolerate it when they're
Hmm.
being lied to, I can tell you. So again, just be honest, be transparent. Mightn't always be the nicest of conversations, but they do in the long run appreciate it, and they don't like stuff being sugar-coated, is my experience of farmers. So just, lay it on the line, be honest, and in the long run, it'll serve you better. That would be my take on it, Tanya.
So from OFI's perspective, or mine rather, I think in relation to our global supply chains, nobody knows our farmer suppliers better than our local teams who are living in origin and working alongside them and have built relationships with them for many years. So it's certainly not for anyone in our corporate team based in London to tell them how to communicate and engage with the farmers. But what we do is support them with developing these playbooks to support the action plans, so their implementation plans that will ultimately deliver our sustainability targets. So communications works very, very closely with our sustainability subject matter experts to develop those playbooks, and then those experts then train our origin and field teams on implementing them with the farmers, and they are tailored to the local context. So they tell us how they can be tailored more, and then we support them with the language and the way in which they're communicated.
Right. Thank you. Perfect. Well, I'm ready. I'll go through some of the questions from the audience on sort of the internal alignment. I think, we've gone through where does the sustainable communication sit, but who you work with and the challenge of building across those functions. So there was a question on, when faced with a controversy, how do you draw the line on who should be doing that communication? Is it the sustainability team, or is it compliance, legal? Who should be the one figuring out the narrative? And I wonder if there's, I feel like a lot of people could speak to that, but maybe Hannah, if I could start with you, if you have any thoughts on that. How do you figure out who should be the one communicating on that front?
I'd say it's probably not a one-size-fits-all solution. I think it will depend on the nature of the issue or the audience that we need to be communicating with. I guess more broadly, it probably goes back to a bit about what I was saying at the top of the call, and certainly within CCP, at least, sort of how we're set up. I think it's probably just more about how teams are aligned more broadly, so that when something does happen, everyone is aware of sort of who does what, who can add value, who needs to see something, consult on something. Of course, there are systems in place, when unexpected things happen. But I think in general, it's probably about sort of not being so siloed overall in terms of, oh, well, that's a sustainability job or that's a comms job. I think for us, at least, the benefit of us kind of sitting together in the PACS function means that we have a lot of sort of shared expertise. We have a lot of subject matter experts. And so I think it's probably more a case of identifying the right people to be involved, rather than taking a view that it belongs to one certain individual or one certain team of people.
Anyone else want to join on that? Agree, disagree? Who leads on? And there was another question on how do you balance compliance and storytelling, which is similar vein. So how does that work internally? It'd be great to get some thoughts. Sarah.
Yeah, sure. I think just to the previous point, I would fully agree. I think in terms of dealing with those issues, it's very much a collaborative effort. And I think, it's about having the relationships across the business so that you can pull the right people in depending on what the topic is and what the information is that you need in order to, align, make sure that you can get things, signed off quickly, you can get the right information at the right level. So, and I think exactly it's a case by case. And then I think that compliance and engagement piece, it's interesting because I think people see sometimes compliance as being this sort of, the fun police that sit at odds to this engagement and storytelling piece. And actually for me, I don't see it so much like that. I think compliance is clearly a given, but if you're complying as an organization, you're doing great things. And that's the foundation for the stories that you tell. How you then bring those stories to life and how you make those things engaging is about, again, going back to that relevance and relatability. So finding the right messenger for the right audience, making sure that that message lands in a very targeted way, that's relevant to the people that you want to tell that story to. So I think, it's, for me, compliance is the foundation to everything. And it's like when you look at, again, reporting, and you may look at that as a topic that's quite dry and that sits and lives in an annual report that sits on a shelf. Actually, again, I think as sustainability storytellers, what goes into those documents, again, is a whole load of golden nuggets that give us the foundation then to tell those stories to the different audiences that we're working with.
Yeah. Sorry, I wonder if you had anything to add there, because you mentioned, the different reporting lines to legal, HR, CSO, CEO. I think those are maybe the four. So when those perspectives or points clash, like who tends to then win out, but then overall, how does that communication, no pun intended, happen between those different reporting lines?
Yeah, I mean, being integrated with all of those functions it's beneficial more than it creates confusion or complexity. So there's a lot of crossover on, for example, last year on our EUDR communications materials, it was very much a joint effort between sustainability communications, legal and compliance. We also have a finance for sustainability team, which merges the sustainability and finance function. It's where they come together, but they are, again, a dedicated team. And they actually lead our mandatory reporting. So this frees up the comms team to focus more on the storytelling opportunities, and also our voluntary reporting, so our impact reports, for example. So that's another team to throw into the mix that we're very integrated with.
And do you have anything to add?
Yeah, just one point I'd make as well, Tanya, is I think a key component here, just to the piece on compliance and storytelling, is strategy. I think if your strategy is strong enough and it's got I guess, the purpose and the substance that it needs, then, the storytelling will naturally flow from that. If you've got really good initiatives, the storytelling, this is where the comms experts come into their own. You can tell a really good story. So for me, I think the strategy is part of that discussion as well.
There was also, if we stay on the internal alignment part, if we just go into basics, there was a Q&A, there's a question from the audience on, what are the key elements when creating an effective sustainability communications toolkit? So what goes into it from the start? What should we be thinking about? Do you have any thoughts? There's a few people that I know that I could turn to, but if there's anyone that wanted to go first. Yeah, Sarah.
I think for me, you've got to start from your audience. So it's something that, again, going back to, particularly for me in my role dealing with such an enormous group of stakeholders, you've got to be very strategic about how you reach people in the right way. So if you're building tools, I think you've got to start from, who are you building those for? And then what's the most appropriate way to do that? So before you even get into the content, I think it has to start from the audience. I think if you get that right up front, everything else flows from there.
Yeah, I'd absolutely agree with that. And I think it's then about sort of equipping teams with those tools. And I think there's also a big element of, it's a bit of a dichotomy, isn't it, in sustainability comms, that on one hand, there are people who are very nervous about it because, they understand the potential scrutiny. In some cases, the way that we communicate about sustainability is akin to the way that we would communicate about our financial results. And, we do need to be very careful, particularly in this sort of new era. that we're not seen to be greenwashing or saying things that we shouldn't. But on the other hand, we really want to talk about it. It's brilliant. We have great stories to tell. It's core to how we're operating. So one thing that we've seen some success with is sort of creating comms guidance around that, which I think, very much isn't us being the police, I think, as someone referred to earlier, where we're kind of saying, you need to, this is what you shouldn't say. It's very much about just putting some guardrails and giving guidance on, yes, there are things we need to be very careful about. There are, certain words, certain bits of data that need to be very carefully checked. But actually, sustainability comms is a great opportunity for the business. It's a great opportunity for storytelling. So yes, here's the guidance, but see this as actually an opportunity to go off and tell these stories in the right way, rather than sort of worrying that anything that you do is going to be sort of subject to criticism or scrutiny.
If there's anyone that want to add to that, otherwise, yeah, go ahead, Zoe.
I'll just add that another challenge we had was we may have had all of those FAQs and toolkits available, but we being the communications team, a lot of questions from colleagues all over the business saying, oh, where can I find messaging on this? Or do you have some slides about this? So we've created, as of last year when we launched our sustainability strategy, an internal sustainability resource hub, which we're actively promoting as everyone's one-stop shop for all sustainability resources. So whether that's implementation playbooks for origin teams or customer FAQs and slides for sales and marketing colleagues. And it's also serving to help accelerate onboarding. So introducing our sustainability story to new joiners, for example, as well as helping that knowledge retention throughout the business.
Yeah. And while I have you, Zoe, there was also a question from Andrea Esposito Diaz in the chat, asking, when we're aligning internally with different teams, but also different partners are working on a strategy, like external companies, but still sort of before we communicate this externally. I know that with your new strategy, when we worked together on it, you were focusing on this as well. You have really fantastic partners that you worked with. How did that look like? She mentions, especially when each partner has competing messaging priorities. How did those all come together?
So the process of creating the strategy started with, the stakeholder engagement right from the get-go. So the comms, brand, and marketing teams, we all ran focus groups and external research to define what our white space for differentiation was, to create the value proposition, etc. But even the name Choices for Change came from our understanding of our customers' different requirements for sustainability and where they were on their journey. And we tested the strategy and the goals with those key customers to see how they resonated and aligned, because ultimately delivering our targets, we're always very clear that relies on engagement and partnerships with them, as well as donors, NGOs who were also involved in those focus groups. The strategy itself, the document, we worked with our teams to secure agreement from 17 partners to actually print their logos in the formal document. And 4 of those partners provided some nice long form testimonials that helped promote their belief in our capabilities to endorse it. And then the launch webinar, which you co-hosted with us, involved 3 of our key partners that had been sort of involved throughout the journey, to help co-present our own strategy. So we weren't just talking about it ourselves. And I think, we had over 500 customer and important NGO and donor stakeholders who tuned in to watch it.
Great. Just one last question before we turn to the external part. On the internal communication, there was a question on measurement. I would love to hear what you thought on it, because they ask, how can we verify that our sustainability objectives are generating genuine impact and not just strategic narratives. So I guess a little bit on, yeah, how do we make sure that that's not happening? And then how do you actually measure that not happening? And I wonder if I can turn to you on this one.
Yeah, sure, sure. So I guess my immediate thought, Tanya, would be if I just look at some of the metrics we do cover. So take, for example, carbon footprint and emissions. So again, there's a very tangible way of measuring those. So again, you look at the carbon footprint reduction, for example, as opposed to, just a narrative. You can get real hard data to prove that that is the reduction. Same for water savings, same for waste. Biodiversity, we've now got biodiversity mapping. We can look at natural habitats versus semi-natural habitats. So there's a way to actually decipher there's real impact to the question. I guess when it comes into the social space, it's a little bit trickier. It's not as tangible, but again, there are metrics we can develop to that, that have real hard numbers behind them. So I think that's for me, that's the way I would approach it, Tanya. Chase those hard metrics, and I guess look, you can have your pie charts and your graphics to show the hard numbers. And then I suppose then you get into you can substantiate that with a bit of narrative to back up the numbers. That would be my approach.
My turn to be muted. Did anyone want to add anything on that, on data? Like, how are you measuring? How are you making sure that it's actually creating impact? Yeah, Sarah.
I think just to reinforce the importance of that link between sustainability communications and reporting, because again, in transparent reporting is where the measurement of that progress really comes. And then in the communications, that's where you have the opportunity to bring that progress to life in a very tangible way. And it's why anything that we communicate as sustainability communicators must be rooted in proof. And that has to come from what we're reporting on in that transparent way.
Great. Then if we're looking at sort of more the external communicating, in this case, because it's B2B, communicating with clients, we obviously have a wide range of types of, where you're all four of you are located and different types of, areas that you operate in. But maybe if I could start with you, Sarah, in terms of, since you have so many different ingredients, all of the different sourcing geographies, a long list of sort of points that you could communicate on, how do you go about choosing what to prioritize? What should you be communicating on? And does that then differ across each geography, or it's a bit of a picture?
It's a really great question, and it's a perennial challenge, as I'm sure that many people on the call will recognise. So for us, the way that we work is that in order to prioritise for comms, so I worked very closely with the rest of our sustainability leadership team to build a sustainability communication strategy, so a dedicated strategy for sustainability comms, which sits as part of the wider integrated comms strategy, but that really drills down into those priorities. So we ran workshops, for example, with the team to really understand who the audiences are, what the key materiality topics are that are most important in order to move the needle on the strategic imperatives over the next 5 years. And from that, we shaped the strategy that was really built around those priorities, because I'm sure, again, many people on the call will recognise that, in our roles, there is so much going on in so many different places with so many different teams that you could spend your entire day reacting to events and reacting to requests from all over, and actually the impact wouldn't necessarily be there. So for me to be able to build something that's very focused and very prioritized around those strategic priorities is key. And I think it also goes back to that measurement point. You've got to be talking about the things that are actually making the difference, not just the nice stories for the sake of it, if that makes sense.
Hannah, I wonder if you wanted to add anything on that in terms of, how do you choose which stories to prioritize? You're obviously also operating in different jurisdictions from Asia and Europe. How does that then look differently across areas?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think first and foremost, we have sort of brilliant communications teams in all of our individual markets. So they will obviously be very, very close to all of their audiences there. and any sort of specific market needs that they have, of course, we will support from the sort of corporate centre, but they're certainly very well equipped to do that. Look, I think, you know, there are so many different topics, there are so many competing priorities, but I think it's also looking, you know, where we want to drive the most progress. So, you know, we do a huge amount of work with our public affairs team on, you know, how we can sort of support the advocacy work that they're doing on some of those key topics. You know, it's something we're looking at particularly on our social channels next year, so that we can almost sort of double down on our efforts there on the areas where, you know, we really want to accelerate progress, but we know that we need others to support us doing that. We work extremely closely with our commercial team in the way that we want to talk about sustainability to all of our customers, you know, whether that's sort of large retailers or the sort of hospitality industry. And again, you know, a lot of that is understanding that audience and the things that matter to them, you know, the things that we want them to know about us, but again, also the areas where we, you know, would really like their help or would like to partner on sustainability initiatives. And I guess just another kind of final example on that is, you know, our employees, which I know we've talked a lot about on this call. You know, it's a huge cohort of people, and, you know, it's everything from, yes, making sure that they're informed with what we're doing, because it's really important and we want them to understand the action that we're taking. But actually a lot of the activity, in fact, all of the activity that is underway to help us reach our sustainability goals is taking place on the ground. You know, our employees are doing that. So we need to make sure that we're making really strong connections between the work that we're doing and the big corporate messages, but also the impact that it's having, and showing how progress really, really happens, not just to inspire those employees, but to also show them how they're kind of part of the solution and keep them engaged in that way.
And Zoe, from your side, obviously you're operating and, you know, you source commodities that have often been scrutinized or quite divisive and, you know, quite difficult to publicly talk about issues like, you know, the area like deforestation, child labor, like we discussed in our prep call. How do you know when to speak about it? When is it best to then not mention something? How does that look like in sort of the scrutinized areas?
So I think we have kind of internally agreed positions, and having a dedicated sustainability comms team internally, there's greater awareness now that we are the first point of contact for everyone to discuss when those issues came up and how to communicate them. So our internal resource hub hosts our position statements, FAQs on key topics like how we talk about child labour, EUDR, so that we're ensuring consistent and accurate messaging throughout. When we really have crises, we're looking into running incident response training sessions. So we're looking to run, like these would be mock real-time incident response sessions for product and regional communication sub-teams. But just to reiterate the point, there is that awareness now that it's our team that takes the call on how we communicate, and we liaise with the legal governance CEO office on what we want to say, if we want to say, and to whom. So we may have very specific conversations that we have one-on-one with customers, but actually beyond that, we're not going to be communicating externally.
Yeah. Tough area to be in. In terms of there's a few questions from the audience on how do you instill all these technical points from Alona and Samantha. They both ask about, you know, how do you communicate overly technical dynamics to a non-technical audience in a way that's more engaging, more understandable. Two questions on that. So I want to see if anyone from the panel wanted to speak on that to start. Maybe, Sarah, if I can turn to you first.
Yeah, sure. So I think there's a few things. I think in terms of oh, I'm so sorry. Can you hear me okay? I'm having problems with my sound. Okay. Sorry. Yes, so I think Sorry, can you just repeat the question again, the end part of the question?
Yeah, of course. It was
Sorry.
basically about how do you go about distilling very technical points and
Yes.
input into for non-technical audiences,
Yeah,
basically.
so I think having a really open dialogue with the subject matter experts is key to start with, because I think if you have that open communication, you can really start to understand this stuff yourself and hear it in their own words. Then it is about translating it into a more digestible way. But I think that there is also sometimes a conundrum that we face in sustainability comms where we are faced with simplifying something that is an inherently complex topic. And I think sometimes we have to find a balance. There are certain topics that lend themselves to being able to be simplified into an infographic or a video or something that's much more succinct. But there are some topics where it's really, really important that we keep that level of detail, we keep that level of data, and we don't lose that and risk tipping into greenwash territory. So I think it's a really sometimes quite a challenging judgment call to make. But I think, as I say, the starting point is really having the good relationship with the topic experts so that you can really build that understanding and being close to the sustainability team and the work that's actually happening day to day.
Yeah, go ahead, Hannah.
Yeah, I was just going to add, I think one thing that helps us as well is taking quite a sort of social first approach to our communications. Now, our social media channels are you know, a huge external channel for us, and what that sort of challenges us to do is to just always use really clear and simple language, whoever the stakeholder is. And I think, you know, even if it isn't a piece of work that is necessarily intended for social media, what we will quite often do is our sort of litmus test to say, okay, but hang on, if we were writing this as a social post, thinking about our very, very large and varied audience on social, which is everything from, you know, employees to people who are interested in the sort of Coca-Cola brand, how would this show up for them? And, you know, would it be easily understood? As I say, it doesn't mean that every single piece of content we create is a social post, but I think as a sort of mindset, that's been quite helpful for us in terms of how we sort of distill that information really, really simply.
Yeah, go ahead, Zoe.
Yeah, I'd say, yeah, translating technical language into language that resonates or messaging and storytelling is probably takes up 90% of my time. And I would completely agree with Sarah that having that relationship with our subject matter experts, that's where it has to start. I cannot even count how many hours of calls I've had with them. I mean, they're such a wealth of knowledge. I've learned an incredible amount from them, but then taking that, distilling it, and translating it. We are increasingly looking at alternatives to sort of long form copy to deliver that message in a more human way that connects better with the audience. So infographics, videos. For example, we did to try and explain just how complex and sort of Herculean the task of deforestation monitoring is. We had our team in Guatemala, our coffee team, create a video. It was quite sort of rough. It wasn't a very polished video, but it meant that the viewer was physically watching one of our enumerators walking the boundary of a coffee farm with our app that maps the polygon as they're walking. It's showing how remote the farm is. So getting across the message that they're so remote, it's only accessible via a moped that they see arrive at the farm. He can only map 2 farms a day. So it's a much more engaging way of conveying the complexity of deforestation mapping without quite a technical explanation in the form of a news article or something. So yeah, the visual assets to support it are something that we are increasingly looking at.
Yeah, they're making it feel real, bringing it to the ground is a
Can
really
bring it,
interesting
yeah,
one.
bring it to life in a much
Yeah.
more engaging human way.
Yeah, that's great. If that's publicly available, Zoe, feel free to send it to us and we can share it with everyone that has been tuning in. That'd be great. And for anyone, if there's anything to add, because we're gonna have to wrap up now. Like I mentioned, the idea is for this to be sort of the first of many. So we'll be continuing the conversation on reporting and data and more internal engagement, external B2C. So definitely stay in touch. There's a link in the chat that might be posted again, just as a reminder to join the B2C focused webinar in January, and to also just join our community to make sure you know when we host the next webinar. If you are not able to join the one in January, so it might be in the chat now. But yeah, otherwise, yeah, it's been really fantastic having the four of you on this panel to kick off the series. As we can see, there's still so much to cover, so we'll be continuing it. If anyone listening wants to get in touch on hosting potentially the next one, do let us know. Or if there's any topics that you want to see covered, let us know. The idea is for this to continue and to keep giving complimentary webinars. So we'll have the recording ready in the next few days as well. But yeah, just get in touch with the team, and just a big thank you to the four of you and for all of the questions asked. And see you at the next one in January. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.